Okay, we are live. We'll start the conversation in about 3 minutes. And, once I have sort of introduced myself and India Currents and the topic, do say one or two sentences introducing yourselves as well. You can choose to highlight anything that you deem important when introducing yourself. So that's totally up to you. But yeah. And then I'm hoping, people also introduce themselves from in their comment section. So yeah, I am excited for this conversation.
Me too.
Yeah, I really appreciate India Currents kind of taking this forward and making this kind of topic an important one.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you know, we have always tried to um, make sure that we are covering this from all aspects. But I think, Anjali and Aruna, you've both been featured and written about in India Current. So we really do try to bring as many different fronts as possible when covering. It's a very, as any other thing, everything is a very diverse topic, and it's really important that we highlight all of those aspects. Yeah. Mhm. It looks like the live went through properly, so I'm happy about that. Yeah, as it tends to happen, technology fails us when we need it the most. Okay, I hope you both got your chai ready for this.
Mhm. Yeah, something hot, right? Yeah.
Yeah, something hot. Yeah,
I
I don't know
can't
you.
function without it.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, same. um, so Anjali, you are in the Bay Area, and Aruna, you're on the East Coast.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. It's getting hotter here in the Bay Area. How's the weather like where you are?
Well, right now, today, it's fine. The snow is finally melting.
Mm,
We've had mountains of snow for, I think, like, I don't know, the better part of the month.
mm-hmm,
And it has been pretty grim. So today actually is a really nice, almost spring-like day. So let's hope it
mm-hmm,
lasts.
mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. We've been seeing photos. Our managing editor Mira is from New York, so she has also been sharing what's been going on. So it's been crazy. The storm has been
Yeah,
crazy.
yeah.
Hmm. We have a minute to go. Um, but yeah, thank you so much for making time on a weekend also.
Only for India currents, because I don't
Uh,
talk to many people these days. So when I saw India currents, I was like, I have to do it,
I
irrespective of
love
whoever is
that.
joining. And I have a lot of respect for Vandana. I mean, you all really stood by Kinnar trans people always. And, I appreciate that. And women leadership.
I
I
love
love
that.
seeing that.
I love to hear that. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, so it's 11 a.m. So we can begin the show. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of Chai and Chat. I'm Prachi Singh, the audience engagement editor at India Cards. And today I'm joined by Aruna Rao and Anjali Rimi to talk about systems of care that make love possible for the LGBTQIA plus community. So thank you both for taking the time to be here on the show where people can ask you questions in real time about the importance of family care, building community, and where people can find resources. I asked both of you to very briefly introduce yourselves. So, Anjali, why don't you go first?
Thank you, Prachi. Anjali Rimi, my pronouns are she, her, they, them. I'm a proud Indian Kinnar Hindu transgender immigrant and a proud mother, sister, daughter, grandmother to young, and many more. But most importantly, I'm a proud human being that uplifts dignity and respect.
Thank you, Anjali. Aruna.
So yeah, thank you so much for having me here. My name's Aruna. My pronouns are she and her. I'm the proud parent of a queer and trans person, and also the founder of Desi Rainbow, which is a national nonprofit And we provide support, education, and advocacy for LGBTQ people who are of South
Mhm.
Asian descent, as well as their families and parents, grandparents, allies.
Mhm. Awesome. Thank you so much. To our audience, please introduce yourselves in the comment section. We'd love to see where you are joining us from. And we want you to participate in this conversation. So please put your questions, comments in the chat, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. And we will be keeping track of your questions if we can't get to them in real time. There could be slight delays in us getting to your questions, so please be patient. Also, please do keep your questions and comments respectful and on topic. We want to make this a positive space for everyone. Don't forget to hit that heart button if you're enjoying the conversation. We will be going on for about 30 to 45 minutes. So settle in. Hope your chai is warm and let's get started. Anjali and Aruna, let's start with, I'm going to put forward one question for each of you to begin this conversation. Um, Aruna, let's start with what support looks like when parents are learning in real time. What are some of the things that you have heard from parents and you yourself have talked about in terms of care and learning and growth? Um, yeah.
So yeah, so typically, parents of queer and trans kids, kids of any age, whenever, they come out to their parent,
Mm-hmm,
um, one of the first reactions that we see a lot of in our community is both grief and fear. So those are typically the reactions that we have. Ideally speaking, it would be lovely if like parents could be thrilled for their kid, which is what their kid wants, right? Their kid wants them to be really happy for them for having the courage and the clarity to be who they are. But
mm-hmm,
typically, all of us, and I'll speak a little bit about my own experience. We want the very best for our children, right? We want our children to have better lives than us. We want our children to like just, have all the things that we didn't have perhaps in our own lives.
mm-hmm,
And as immigrants, we are always hoping that our child's life will be easier than ours. And so when the child comes out, there's a lot of like reactions which are about fearfulness. What kind of life will my child face? What are the kind of barriers and obstacles? And we know very well, even if you're cisgender, heterosexual people, we know very well how the world treats LGBTQ people. So
mm-hmm,
that fear is usually the first reaction.
mm-hmm,
And then, that can sometimes be followed by denial, by anger.
mm-hmm,
Many times that grief keeps coming, flowing, ebbing, because we tend to grieve for what we think we have lost more than looking
mm-hmm,
forward to what we can have in the future. So
mm-hmm,
those are some of the typical, like, family reactions. And where you go from there really depends on what kind of trajectory you choose for yourself.
mm-hmm,
Would you want it, or a trajectory perhaps that you're able to choose for yourself? Because there's so many other circumstances that parents are dealing with, not just, their own relationship with their child, but the wider environment,
mm-hmm,
society, extended family, all of those things.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, Anjali, um, can you talk a little bit about barriers for the LGBTQIA plus community, and especially as immigrants, what difference does it makes for us?
Absolutely. Again, I want to uplift trans
Hmm.
lives and voices. So I want to begin by honoring the life of Summer Devi Mehta, who tragically, you know, left us about a month or so ago. And I begin that by saying that the most biggest barrier is around having cultural understanding of what a trans journey is in an already rich but perhaps complex diaspora, whether that's Indian or any other aspects of the South Asian,
Hmm.
diaspora. So I think the biggest barrier is understanding that we are not beginning from zero. It is about making sure that we are grounded in our heritage and in
Hmm.
our history to recognize that this has been one of the most, open and open-minded and culturally competent, communities that has always welcomed, gender diversity I think the second biggest barrier for, the LGBTQIA plus and the alphabet soup is really understanding one another and understanding that we have privilege and at the same time we have disparity. And when we kind of think about trans folks, because I'm speaking from my own lived experience as a trans person, I think the biggest barrier is to recognize that when we are on gender journeys, it is so important for us to be affirmed in the home communities that we exist in, whether that is our own blood family or chosen family. And then the third biggest barrier is this whole aspect of mental health, where again, with the complex heritage and cultures and multi faiths we have, there's an expectation to follow a family honor, sacrifice, and survival. So we end up having to have crossed oceans as immigrants or survive poverty when we kicked out of homes or flee violence to end up being scarred with that mental trauma for the rest of our life. So the ecosystem as a whole is very fragile and it needs to get more buttoned up. And that will perhaps remove a lot of many other barriers that we see and many of us experience.
So, actually, the point that both of you brought up is basically affirmation within the community. And then again, within your family, that really, really actually sets the foundation for anybody, I would say, to get that confidence to step up and step out into the world. Be confident and, be okay with whoever you are. I think one of the questions that came from the audience is, and sort of matches with what we are talking right now, is so how different are the systems in immigrant families as compared to the ones in United States? So I'm assuming that, the question that they're trying to ask here is comparing the systems here in the US versus being Indians and being in an immigrant family or in an immigrant community. So I think Anjali and even you, Aruna, both of you touched a little bit upon that, but if you both can elaborate, and maybe Aruna, you can start off first, and Anjali, you can add on to it.
Yeah, no, I think frankly, many of the issues that families share, regardless of your background, are very similar. I've always found that fear and grief usually is what people are encountering.
Mhm,
That said, I think one of the things I've experienced in my journey as an immigrant is that immigrant parents particularly are kind of trapped sometimes in our own immigration bubble, right?
mm,
So, for instance, like, I came here in the 1980s, and so those kinds of things, the India that I left at that time is what I'm
mhm,
holding in my mind as the culture that, I brought here and what I'm trying to
mhm,
kind of pass on to my children.
mhm,
And so that sense of like, heritage, wanting to value your heritage, wanting to value your culture, your family background, all of those
mhm,
things are something that immigrants kind of really feel very strongly about.
mhm,
And that can sometimes trap you in this assumption that it's not okay. It's not okay for your child to be LGBTQ. It's not okay for your child to be queer and trans because it doesn't
mhm,
happen in my community. It doesn't happen in my culture.
mhm,
And as Anjali pointed out, that's really an error. There is a very vibrant heritage in South Asia of, queer
mhm,
and trans identities, which may not be, it may not be what we want it to be today, but obviously there is a history and a past that we can draw on for sustenance and strength.
mhm,
And so I think that is the primary difference in terms of how South Asian families will handle a child coming out versus perhaps, a family that has, multiple generations of immigration experience behind them.
mhm,
Um, that said, I find that, again, one of the cultural values that we have, right, is our connection with our children
mhm,
um, extends far beyond the age that at which, like most perhaps mainstream, American families would, the child was essentially separate from the family and live a very independent life. Our
mhm,
connections are lifelong and much closer, both in terms of, perhaps a sense of obligation, but also like, filial affection,
mhm,
duty, all of those things are really important to us. So we tend to see that our children try to spare our feelings. So, it's always a sense of like, I don't want to shame my parents, I don't want to shame my family. And so that sense, unfortunately, like also holds back our children because they're also trying to look out for us. So this affection and this, kind of obligation goes both ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I think really, if we can use those things as strengths rather than as weaknesses, we can actually
Mm-hmm.
get to a space where we acknowledge that, parents and, an older generation has to acknowledge, has to have the humility to know that we don't know everything. And that we have to like essentially let our child like be able to tell us what they know, and we may not
Mm-hmm.
know what they're saying. So that humility has to come from us. So it's a little bit of change required of us as parents, as an older generation. And for
Mm-hmm.
children, it's also to acknowledge the trauma that their parents have faced as immigrants. The racism we encountered, all the barriers that we've encountered, always with this kind of idea that, our children will have a better life than us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Anjali, do you want to add how systems look different in immigrant families than the ones in the US?
Yeah, I want to speak from a lens of, you know, understanding what immigrant journey is at an individual level. Whether you're collective in a family or you're an individual, that journey is yours. And, the work we do at Parivar Bay Area, which I'm so honored and proud to lead, is around that, to recognize that it doesn't just encompass and eclipse LGBTQ lives. It eclipses and takes over, overshadows families and lives at large as us who are considered and seen as strangers from another, border or
Mm-hmm.
across borders.
Mm-hmm.
So the struggle begins with, becoming the lead as a individual. If you are the one that's empowered and understand the system, maybe have language access, that now you're leading your family, even though you might be 7 years old. And inversely, it can also be that the burden falls on the identity, whether it's LGBTQ or transgender, to now become, be in a survival mode, because I
Mm-hmm.
think we all know what that migration trauma is today or 25 years ago when I came to this country. But it comes back to us, needing to hold all of that together and also enduring without empowerment most places. It's also hiding our identities. And so when we think of, how
Mm-hmm.
different the systems are with immigrants and asylees, I don't need to, verbalize that given everything we see that's happening. But I think it's
Mm-hmm.
important to remember that there needs to be an uplifted and a very elaborate understanding that
Mm-hmm.
being first generation individual versus a family is different. And that's what we do at ParivarBayArea with our Tulari program, which is direct legal immigration relief services to address that tension, where it's this
Mm-hmm.
individual identity as an immigrant, even within a family, and then the family systems that we have to uplift because it does, it is not lost on any of us that, America teaches us self determination, allows us to be expressive of who we are. But it also
Mm-hmm.
means that we have to be unapologetic but pragmatic in how we navigate the immigration system to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. Very well put from the both of you. So going forward, I'm gonna like separate out a couple of questions for for Aruna specifically around families, and then systems of care specifically for you, Anjali. So for Aruna, my question is, um, what is your advice on how a young person can feel comfortable coming out to, as we would say, traditional parents? Should there be an ally present to help both the parents and the child navigate that kind of conversation?
Yeah, that really kind of frankly, I think all of these are very individual circumstances. So I
Hmm.
have seen, all kinds of circumstances. So
Hmm.
sometimes, for instance, having like someone, sort of pave the way for you might make a
Hmm.
difference. But my one thing that I tell anybody who's talking about, coming out to their families, is to make sure that you are safe before you take that step. So you're
Mm,
safe, both, in terms of your mental health, in terms of your
mhm,
physical safety, and in terms of your economic safety. Because many
mhm,
times, Basic Rainbow serves a really large group of LGBTQ young adults, mostly college age and maybe a little bit over college age. And
mhm,
so they're many of them are kind of ready, they really feel like they're stifled. They really want to like kind of be able to speak to their families. But
mhm,
many times they're not economically independent, or they may not
mhm,
have, the physical safety in terms of
mhm,
perhaps still living at home. So it's always about making sure that you are safe before you take this
mhm,
big step, and you also have a plan for what you could do if things do not go well.
mhm,
That's really important because you hope for the best, you hope that there's love in the family, and you hope that things will really work out. But in case it doesn't, always have a plan for what you
mhm,
need to do otherwise. And
mhm,
I think the coming out. So, for instance, I'm thinking of like some situations that have happened. Um, so, coming out is never a single thing. Uh,
mhm,
what LGBTQ people have told me all the time is that you repeatedly have to come out in different situations, different circumstances, sometimes all through your life. And
mhm,
it's entirely up to you. It's within your control about who you choose to come out to, who you choose not to come out to, or whether to come
mhm,
out at all for that matter.
mhm,
So I think like people have chosen, for instance, like some relatives are safe, some people in your family are safe, some other people in your family are not safe, and so you don't need to do that. I've seen circumstances where there's been such anger and denial on the part of like parents or families that the adult child usually has chosen to have someone else, like an auntie or an uncle, or somebody who essentially like is whose support is valued by the parents, to be
mhm,
present. So we've even had sometimes, for instance, like a religious leader who can speak directly to the parents' concerns about, this
mhm,
is wrong. I'm thinking of this actually wonderful person in the Bay Area who helped this young man come out to his family who were essentially conservative Christians. And
mhm,
I connected them with actually a priest who's originally from Kerala, who lives in the area. And so he was actually able to speak directly to the parents and talk
mhm,
about like essentially like, these may be the misconceptions that you have, but
mhm,
accept your child with an open heart and God will support you. So those kinds of things can sometimes be very helpful, but it
mhm,
really is a very individual circumstance. And I think one of the things that people have told me, and I've also experienced, is that a child can sometimes repeatedly try to come out, and the parents either choose to dismiss, deny, or,
mhm,
just in general don't want to like deal with it. So
mhm.
this may be a circumstance where you have to be persistent if you want this to be acknowledged. But again, always be conscious of your safety when that's happening.
Mm. Okay, absolutely. Super, super helpful. Thanks, Aruna. For Anjali, my question is, how can community networks step in when families are unavailable or unsafe, sort of like flows from what Arna was just talking about, that it really, really is important to feel safe, to know that you are safe when you're coming out. What happens when it doesn't go the way that the child is expecting it to? Where can they look for? What can they look for in community networks? How can community networks like yourself and Parivar Bay Area step up when families don't?
Yeah, that's a great question that you've asked. I think it begins with being honest and avoiding saviorship. I'm going to speak from the lens of a trans person myself who came out, and I did not go through the struggle as having the family rejection. But the greater struggle I faced, because most people know my mom is my rock, my family, my husband, everybody, it's been an affirming journey for me. And I think this reflection of where I live today in comfort and safety is because of that. So I think families who choose to not support their children as transgender folks need to really understand, acknowledging that migration alone is a trauma to deal with, that if you
Mhm,
let the child go away, you will not be able to be the strong rock for them. And I get that not every story of telling parents that you're trans is going to end in immediate acceptance. Mine was not that way. But I think it's also making sure that if we turn to folks outside, it's important to recognize that we are not doing it from a lens of saviorship. Yes, there is nonprofits and organizations and a greater network. It's recognizing that that person is now coming into your community with their entirety, whether that's their way of presentation, their gender journey, where they're in the journey. So it begins with removing any judgment. Community judgment is huge in our Indian communities, which I don't need to further. All of us know that. It's also removing the misunderstandings that come. And even in the macro community, this system of care becomes system of awareness and system of encourage. Because when a trans person is rejected by a family, and speaking from firsthand experience, and when we show up in communities that we believe are our home communities, i.e. the LGBT community, that the things that we get associated are the negative connotations of being a hijra, a kinnar, which if you really look at our, our heritage and history and the Hindu mythology, we are actually divinity that's on earth. So I've faced a lot of that in communities that I thought were my home communities. But it's also to remember that when someone is looking to the greater community, safety is a very important aspect. And that also means mental safety, that you don't have the same repeated conversations from people who will not understand. And yes, spaces like ParivarBayArea, who have created this transgender intersectional unity, or actually talking about our Global South trans journeys, it does come down to building chosen family. Chosen family to enable you to get out of survival to actually get to a point of thriving. So a community needs to have the resources and have the patience and bandwidth to put up, and I'm going to use the word put up because it does take a lot for a person to go through a gender journey when denied by family and perhaps in a whole new country or a world that they have not been exposed to, because a lot of children are the diamonds for families and they keep them pretty sheltered. So all of a sudden you're exposed to all these quote unquote elements. So I think it's to go beyond the the understanding that one has to get the person's firsthand needs understood. It's about creating a space for a dialogue. It's about creating real-time resources. Like we at Parivar create referrals. We create for housing, healthcare. Our immigrant leadership program focuses on, enabling somebody to be employment ready, but more importantly, take away the stigma that they're no less than anybody else qualified. So it is about that, but it's also about trying to bring that family back together, because nothing beats having blood family back together as long as it's safe. And it can depend on parental transformation, I get it. But the truth is that, this rejection doesn't define a trans person's identity, but it is a process for the family as well, because they're also on the gender journey. So I think it's definitely to look at disrupting those gender expectations. And, at the end of the day, it's about building the competency for the individual. And as a trans person, making sure they have access to all the basic things so they can get past their, social determinants, and they're not looking for approval or invalidation or inclusion from folks, but they're actually affirmed and they're empowered.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Anjali. We have a question in the comment section, so I want to bring that forward. And it's up, for both of you. You can, whoever feels the best for that answer can go forward. So, do you see differences in attitudes based on religious beliefs, or are most South Asians coming with similar attitudes? Also, do kids become conflicted because of their own faith and beliefs? Either of you can, talk about that.
Yeah, I do feel that, sometimes religious beliefs can have an impact if you have been, kind of raised with the expectation that being queer trans is essentially wrong, perhaps morally wrong, religiously wrong. Then essentially there's a huge conflict. And I'm speaking again from the perspective of families and even actually for LGBTQ people, right? Because if this is what you've been raised with, there's so much conflict and sort of self-rejection that happens. Um, I do believe that many times it is actually more a cultural issue than a religious issue.
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, certainly, if you're kind of like been following some religious leader who tells you that, your child is inherently wrong, that their identity is wrong, then you're likely to sort of, basically believe that so much that you're willing to try and reject or even change your child. But on the other hand, some of this is also about just feeling that your culture in general and perhaps society expects you to be a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking along the lines of, like, for instance, as Anjali pointed out, there's like a really strong South Asian history of, a third gender identities. And so those are things actually that we are aware of in the back of our minds, but we don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily we're not necessarily thinking of that as a religious issue. We're thinking of that as, what about in this country? What does it mean to be trans here? What does it mean to be gay or, bisexual here?
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of like differences in how people approach this, and sometimes bringing religion into it helps in terms of the parents' acceptance journey, and sometimes it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't. So it's about like having to move beyond what your spiritual teacher or your religious group tells you, and being
Right.
able to understand what you need to do as a parent.
Right. Right. Anjali, do you want to add to any of this? I know that proudly say that you're a Hindu, Kinnar, immigrant, trans woman. So if you have anything to add to that in terms of religious aspects.
Yeah, I mean, I speak from my own experience as being a proud, Kinnar and a Hindu, and having survived during the trigger warning, the abhorrent violence I faced in India in a temple that's Yellama temple, where I also got, to establish many things in my life. And I am a proud American with unshakable Indian roots, and
Mm-hmm.
wearing my outfits. But I want to really say, irrespective of religion, the first thing that our diaspora needs to recognize is that safety is the cultural recognition that needs to happen. It's
Mm-hmm.
what's been passed down for each family. It's very different, even within a religion. And we
Mm-hmm.
have to recognize that. And we also have to go back to the fact that there was a time when we, you know, were very diluted in our existence, because so many that what we call tradition today is a colonial inheritance. Before that, we had very fluid gender diversities before we became this rigid gender binaries across South Asia. So we really need to go back to that. And I want to just also uplift that for some of us, that empowerment comes from religion. That
Mm-hmm.
comes from actually finding the roots back. For me, going back to my journey after leaving India almost more than 2 decades ago, and really connecting and becoming the part of the Kinnar Akhara and the Kinnar Samaj really helped me understand that we are so empowered in so many different ways, and we have huge families, and our presence is ancient. So, being, having someone like Lakshminarayan Tripathi as my guru ma has really helped me get back to my roots. But also, I've always rooted in one thing, which is to affirm my religion along with my gender journey. I've never let it go because it fueled my strength. That may not be the case always because of human mindsets, which become very minuscule, and they tend to say that religion is not so. My daughter is a proud doctor who's transgender, and for her being Christian and the faith that it has really helped us helped us all in this chosen family that we are to be sojourned in our faith has really helped her become so successful that she's breaking so many barriers. So I think there's strength in it if we go back to who it is that we are listening to versus going
Mm-hmm.
back and learning it firsthand ourselves, that
Mm-hmm.
religion can be support, but again, we are trying to get muted in a perhaps a migrant journey that we have to be guarded of what we say and how expressive we are because we don't invite hate in other ways. But the reality is, it can really be a strength and a tool if you're able to connect back with it in a more healthy and obviously a safe way to
Mm-hmm.
become very thriving. And I'll just say one thing, always try to connect with the intergenerational folks, whether it's within the family or so, because they'll take you back to the true essence and the authentic roots of what our cultures and our faiths are.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's your
Absolutely.
dadi, chacha, mama, tataya, they bring that back to you, reality to you.
Absolutely. We love to, hear about intergenerational conversations and how what an important role they play. And again, what I'm hearing from all of this conversation is that safety really is the core of it all. Um, just want to give a slight time check. We're at 11:32, so we have about a little less than 15 minutes to go. We had one more question come in from our audience, and this was about, and I think, Anjali, you can go first with this, but Aruna, you too, that for the queer and trans immigrants or first generation individuals who are not fluent in English, what resources truly make a difference in helping them feel safe and supported?
Yeah, this is a very heavy question to answer because in all of our work that we have focused on in Parivar for the 7 years or so that we have existed, it has been around supporting folks, particularly Kinnar, Hijra, Tirunangai, and other gender diversity folks, first generation or immigrants to this country and asylees, to help them get past the language barrier. Again,
Mm,
I say this with a lot of pride that English is not a measure of intellect for anybody. And God bless you if you can ever pick up the language that Hijras and Kinnar speak, which is a mix of Farsi, Persian, Hindi, Urdu, and so many. But again, I go back to safety. Like at ParivarBayArea, like that has been one of our biggest strengths, and grateful to so many volunteers who have helped translate, who have helped be in these very tough meetings, whether that's regarding immigration or help gender affirming health access, or just simply conveying with the right words and language to the parents on a phone or on WhatsApp message. It becomes really transformative when we have that language access and we have those affirming words for an individual in their mother tongue for the first
mhm,
time, or maybe they've said to the parent many times.
mhm,
It that language brings affinity, and a lot of us come from different levels of competency education because we're all fleeing domestic violence, violence in
mhm,
general, and being who we are as trans, Kinnar, Hijra folks. So for us at Parivar, it is to reaffirm with that language that you may not be fluent in English, but it definitely does make a difference to have those language accessible spaces, having these
mhm,
services also be in those, whether it's mental health and immigration sensitive legal support. And the one thing I'll say that is also a barrier is to recognize that this is a very underserved aspect of anybody's journey, not LGBTQ. So we need to band together beyond the diaspora to say these languages, whether it's also Spanish and Portuguese, that we all need to be able to reconnect to be able to form greater scales and strengths. Because it does go back to that, not having that language access, because I have seen people's life be transformed when they have that language access, from winning their asylum cases all the way to
mm,
getting employment and gaining that confidence to then start learning English and then actually proving their merit.
mhm, mhm,
Yeah, I would reinforce that absolutely. Language can make a world of difference
mhm,
in terms of, your ability. And here, we at Desi Rainbow are very concerned about the emotional journey, right? The emotional and social journey that people take. And so our focus is really on one-on-one support for
mhm,
someone who may be kind of, trying to think through issues, trying to figure out where resources are, So we offer a program called Sathi, and in
Mhm,
that we train our volunteers who can be allied. There's many of them are parents of LGBTQ kids. Some of them are queer and trans, and so we train them essentially to provide like emotional support one-on-one in the language of their choice. So
mhm,
we have like about 40 volunteers from different backgrounds, different religious backgrounds, different language backgrounds, and so we try to offer at least that. It's just a drop in the bucket. The need
mhm,
is huge. We're not able to serve everybody who needs to be served in the language of their choice. And
mhm,
so I think there needs to be a lot more resource building in this area. And in the mental health field, there is some amount of focus on providing interpretation services. So we do
mhm,
try and kind of utilize some of that. For instance, sending people to like therapy sources where there is interpretation available. But even in that, there's a lot more that needs to be done. So language access can be really critical to someone's journey, and there is not enough to go around right now.
mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
Just
So I'm going to ask, yeah, go ahead, Anjali.
I just want to uplift two things. One is that, we may not always be reaching the threshold for a language that we speak in the diaspora to become an official language or have services be built around it. So I powerfully, radically invite those that are, not transphobic in the community to come forward, because sometimes we just need that one person to help us translate Bhojpuri. We need that one person who can translate Nepalese. And it's not 10 people needing that access, but that one life you can make a huge difference. And also something we do at ParivarBayArea is we enable our own folks who have the transgender, Kinnar, Hijra journeys to help others with the language, because that, humility of knowing who we are, that makes a huge difference when we're talking about language that is very gendered. Many of our languages are very gendered.
Mhm.
They have Tritiya links too, but it's not that prevalent.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So, for the last 5 minutes that we have, I would like for you guys to give a few resources. So, Aruna, for you, my question is, first of all, some of the languages, and I would, want you both to keep it a little brief, but some of the language that parents can use to reduce harm, even amid disagreement, and some of the resources for the parents who want to support their child's well-being and their journey.
Yeah, for families, I found that many times they are kind of engaged in this sort of learning process that perhaps because of their age or their backgrounds, they're not able to accelerate it to the extent that the child wants.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, like we found particularly with like families with younger kids, pronoun use becomes a really important issue, and the parent may perhaps be unwilling or unable to start like using the pronoun that the child is asking them to use. And this can be kind of devastating for the child because you want to be like proud in whatever identity that you have, particularly in your gender identity, and to
Mm-hmm.
have a parent repeatedly misgender you, which essentially could be like using either neutral pronoun like they or them, or using he or her. And that I think is one of the critical journeys that parents and allies really need to take. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm really proud to see some of our parents do this. They've struggled with this process, but it really is just like anything else. It's like a muscle memory. You keep doing it, and you finally get to the point when you're able to, like, acknowledge a person's identity just the way that they want to have it acknowledged. Other language that you can use really like centers around affirmation, using like things like partner instead of husband or wife, for instance. Those are
Mm-hmm.
other kinds of language that we can all like learn and choose to use.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think for many of us in our native languages, there's not a lot of like choices that we have sometimes for
Mm-hmm.
pronouns. So that also can be additionally confusing. So I think it's just basically a desire to consistently learn and engage, and also to not feel shame or feel conflicted when you don't get it right. So it's always about just apologizing, moving on, and trying again.
Mm-hmm. For you, Anjali, my question is, And it could be actually this question might require a very long answer. I think we can talk about it all day long. Where institutional systems, and you have talked a little bit about that, healthcare, housing, they fall short, and how community organizations are coming in to bridge these gaps.
Yeah, I think it's a blessing and a curse when we are either in the mindset of a minority, minority model myth, and in
Mhm.
the sense that when we juxtapose ethnic identities, religious backgrounds, and then we talk about gender journeys and gender identities, we are going to lose out on something that's not available in the current ecosystem. So
Mm.
organizations like ParivarBayArea end up standing alone most times. We are the only South Asian Kinnar Hijra-led American organization for the past 7 years. That is nothing to brag about. We would like to see
Mhm.
more trans-led organizations in this diaspora because that creates awareness, that requires people to become affirming. And so
Mhm.
when we think of the greater ecosystem and resources, I think as it was touched upon, language, awareness about the culture, as not asking as silly questions as to like, what are you wearing? What's on your forehead? What is, your what? And to the extent to say, oh, when somebody comes out, the biggest resource is for people to not put them in these buckets. For
Mhm.
parents, especially, to not again go back to this colonized inheritance and start calling their child trigger warning, chakka, hijra, whatnot. These are not bad words, but the way and the connotation that it's being used is when someone comes out as gay or lesbian or, importantly, trans. So the ecosystem really has to improve for housing, healthcare, employment access. Here's what I would also say is that people need to overcome the journeys of gender that folks have in the diaspora or in spaces where we go to have other means of existence, whether we're just going to school to get our education or we are going to an employment space to just work. Why does an identity overshadow competency and brilliance, And that is something that the system at the macro and the micro needs to change.
Mhm.
Parents and folks who say they stand by trans people or hijras and kinners need to, really throw out the shackles of shame or blame and really stand with folks. And that's how we change the system, right? And,
Mhm.
and then also it is the grassroots efforts. All of us are trying to make this better for folks somewhere else. I speak from
Mhm.
the experience of many of us at Parivar Bay Area who have gone through hell and back to make it better for somebody else. So we don't have to say we have now gone past that trauma and existed. Trauma should not become a part of the ingredient for somebody's gender journey. So
Mhm.
it's about making sure that we are actually building the capacity for the system, which again, grassroots efforts will grow into some level of scale. And
Mhm.
we need to stop sensationalizing because some of us want to just lead a full life that is much more than an identity of being trans or gender diverse, non binary, or intersex. It is about
Mhm.
making sure that we are empowering ourselves and the systems need to really become that, because again, we have this, xenophobia from, oh, being an immigrant or having an accent to the transphobia of, oh, you're transitioning and you still want to go to school or you still want to work here. We need to get past those things to just look at, did you deliver on your job? Did you get good grades? And really, that is what we do at Parivar. It's not about, building a performative understanding or and asking folks to accept, but really having ourselves exist freely without
Mhm.
labels, but at the same time, making sure that our journeys don't become a spectacle and they're actually as human. And at the end of the day, we own them ourselves, not someone else.
I love that. I think that's a great point to end on. Exist, take freely, and we are also at time. So I think that's a great thought to end this conversation on. So thank you so much, Anjali and Aruna. I definitely have so many more questions around practical tips, resources, and I'll get back to you in touch with those as well. For everybody who RSVP, we will be sending out a resource guide based on this conversation and more tips and resources for you all to keep with you and use them as and when needed. So thank you both for being here. Conversations like
Prachi, can I
these.
just make a quick pitch
Yeah,
for our community survey?
absolutely.
So
Yes.
that's one thing I wanted to make sure that people heard about. So Desi Rainbow is conducting a community needs assessment,
Mhm,
and we're trying to get as wide and diverse a range of LGBTQ people and their families and allies to respond. So the
mhm.
survey link, I believe, is already in the chat, right, Prachi?
Description. It
Yes,
is in the description for this
in the
video.
description, right.
So
Yeah, thank
yeah,
you so much
absolutely.
for that, and really looking forward to hearing from a range of people across the country.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for that reminder, Aruna. So, yeah, please fill out that survey. Community needs assessment like these are really important, for anybody who's providing services to figure out exactly what the needs are and cater to those. But yeah, conversation
I
like
just
these. Oh, yes, Anjali, go ahead.
I just want to invite folks to visit ParivarBayArea.net for our services and our programs. And we
Mhm.
really invite folks across many identities and genders and cultures and backgrounds to really show up and support Parivar Bay Area. We are a grassroots organization that continues to center and be led by trans Hijra Kinnar folks, uplifting our Indian Kinnar heritage, our global South futures, and honoring immigrant journeys. So thank you for having us, and a huge shout out to India Currents. You all unapologetically always stand with transgender voices, particularly in the diaspora, and it has been really, really powerful to see that happen, not just in this instance, but for the many years I've existed in Bay Area, almost a decade, that has been definitely the DNA of your work. So I'm really grateful and thank you for, today, but also all the work you all do at India Currents.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We love to hear that. Absolutely. And we really want to keep this going forward, keep doing this going forward. So yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to our audience also for joining us today. These are the moments where I think we strengthen our community with these conversations and how we see each other and ourselves. I think it brings more clarity when we talk freely and openly about everything that matters to us. And to our audience, if this conversation resonated with you, please consider sharing, liking, subscribing to us. Also, let us know what other topics you would want us to chat about in the comment section or on the website, indiacurrents.com. Chai and Chat. You can go to the page and drop in your suggestions there as well. Until next time, this was Prati from India Currents with Chai and Chat. Thank you so much.